Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers.
We're going to begin with news out of Gaza. Some deadly incidents there are seriously testing this fragile ceasefire. This morning, the Israeli military says it opened fire on several people that it said were approaching its position, alleging they had crossed a boundary for the initial Israeli pushback. Health officials in Gaza say the IDF killed at least 6 Palestinians in 2 separate incidents across the enclave.
The renewed violence comes just one day after both Israelis and Palestinians celebrated the return of their loved ones. All 20 living Israeli hostages were released by Hamas, along with 4 deceased bodies, which Israeli officials say they have now identified. In turn, Israel released 250 Palestinian prisoners and 1,700 detainees it had held in prison without charge since October 7th. Well, the releases are part of phase 1 of President Trump's peace plan. Mr. Trump wrapped up his visit to the Middle East yesterday by co-signing a document with the leaders of Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar, backing peace in the region. But attention now turns to the next steps of this plan. That includes the future of Gaza, the prospect of Palestinian statehood, as you heard the president discussing, and the disarming of Hamas. That is something the president expressed uncertainty about during that same flight back to the U.S.
Talking about rebuilding Gaza. I'm not talking about single state or double state or 2 state. We're talking about the rebuilding of Gaza. A lot of people like the 1-state solution. Some people like the 2-state solutions. We'll have to see. I haven't commented on that.
In a few moments, we will speak with a family member of 2 former hostages. But before that, let's get to NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley, who's in Israel. He's with us all morning yesterday throughout this process. Matt, it has been a day now since all the living Israeli hostages were released. We have seen these just overwhelmingly emotional reunion videos. What are we hearing from these now freed hostages? And also tell us, what more are we learning about the 4 bodies that were returned?
Yeah, well, right now I'm actually in front of Shiva Hospital, as you can see behind me, and these celebrations, these emotions are now spilling into day 2. These are young religious Jews, Israelis, who are celebrating they're celebrating Simchat Torah, which is a religious holiday, but they're combining that with the celebration of the release of these hostages, about 9 of whom are convalescing in the hospital behind me. Now, as all of this is going on, we're not hearing so much from these hostages. We have seen these incredibly emotional reunions. It's only been a little more than 24 hours since they were released, and we're expecting to hear a lot more about the trials that they endured at the hands of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But like you said, there's still so many questions about this moving forward.
Yeah, and Matt, what can you tell us about those deadly incidents coming out of Gaza this morning? Could they put the ceasefire in any danger?
They absolutely could, but remember that we saw deadly incidents like this in Lebanon, everywhere, with Hezbollah. This is a situation where we're always seeing the Israelis, after they sign some sort of treaty or ceasefire, they will take shots and they will continue to fight, particularly, as they say, if they think that there are Palestinians who are approaching their position in an aggressive way. Now, this violence looks set to continue because the balance of the fighting is actually among different Palestinian factions in the Gaza Strip. Hamas and the Dukhmush clan, along with Al-Shabaab, which is a clan in the Gaza Strip that is widely thought and acknowledged to be backed by the Israelis. Hamas has been going around fighting against people who they say, groups who they say are opposed to them, killing dozens of people. Several Hamas fighters have also been killed in these clashes as well. So we're seeing fighting between the Israelis and Hamas on the one side and fighting among Palestinians on the other, as Hamas takes account of what has happened and, as they say, goes around and tries to inflict punishment on those who oppose them. This happens regularly after long battles between Israel and Hamas. They decide to do summary executions and take justice into their own hands against those they see as internal enemies and spies.
Matt, wow. Also, I want to ask about these crowds in Gaza yesterday welcoming hundreds of Palestinians who had been detained by Israel without charge since October 7th. We're hearing some of their stories now, some of them alleging mistreatment during that time. What can you tell us?
Important to note that not all of these people are without charge. 250 of them were convicted and are serving life sentences. Some of those were sent to the Gaza Strip, but there were about 1,700 more than 1,700 who were released into Gaza and the West Bank and elsewhere ever since and they had been arrested before or after the October 7th attacks. So for them, they have been enduring a long time in prison, some of them without charge, many of them minors and women, and the relief is huge. They were subject to a judicial system that had treated them essentially as enemy combatants, and for many, they were too young to be fighters, so it's a massive relief to their families. But those 250 life sentence prisoners have been released from major prisons in the West Bank and elsewhere, in Israel. That is going to be a vexing issue going forward, both for Palestinians and Israelis.
Matt, as we mentioned, the president now back in the U.S. after that whirlwind trip to the Middle East that we followed here yesterday morning, starting in Israel. Then we saw him sign that document in Egypt yesterday. First, what exactly does the document say, and what comes next in this push toward peace?
Yeah, the document was interesting, wasn't it? Because it wasn't the 20-point plan. It was essentially a statement of intention, of peace. Now, I can tell you that nobody here talks about peace nearly as much as what we're hearing from these diplomats. Peace, when it comes to the Middle East, is a term used far more often in Washington than it is in Jerusalem or Ramallah. But this was a stirring moment. But we didn't see the leaders of Israel or the leaders of Hamas or Iran signing on to this peace document, this expression of intent, more than an actual set of guidelines guiding this ceasefire forward.
All right, Matt Bradley, thank you very much.
Let's bring in Dalia Kusnir-Horn. She is the sister-in-law of former hostages Yair Horn, who was released in February, and his brother Eitan Horn, who was released just yesterday. And there we see that moment. Dalia, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us about these moments. How are you doing? How's your brother-in-law doing?
And just looking at this video over and over again, it makes me cry every time. Wow, I have no words to explain. You know, after we started realizing the horrible condition, the starvation, the torture, and what Hamas terrorists are doing to our hostages, every one of them who's coming back is as if they're coming, you know, from hell into life all of a sudden. And after 2 years of, you know, fighting for them and doing everything we can, the fact that we actually have him and the 3 siblings, my husband together with his two brothers that were both abducted, the 3 of them together was the most amazing thing we'd experienced, you know, in a long while.
We know, as we mentioned, Eitan taken hostage alongside his brother Yair, who was released this past February. Our understanding is that they spent some of that time in captivity together, and now he's been pushing for his brother's release since then. Tell us a little bit about their time in captivity, but then also what their reunion was like yesterday.
So they were held together most of the time until Yair's release back in February 15th, 2025. And since Yair was released and a few hours after he landed here at the hospital in Tel Aviv, the first thing he said is, what can I do to release my brother and all the rest, you know? And we tried to make him go through rehabilitation and go to, you know, physical tests and see what's going on, because he came back in a very bad shape. But he was not willing to do so because he understood that we need to release all the hostages. So he's been fighting ever since he was released. We've been fighting ever since October 7th. And the fact that the 20 living hostages came back yesterday was, once again, you know, for all the families, it was the first time we were talking this morning when we met, you know, in the corridors of the hospital, and we said to each other, good morning. And it was the first time that I could really mean the word good in the morning, you know, and it was the first time that we can ever breathe. And at the same time, we sit down with Eitan and he starts talking very slowly about some experiences back there. And immediately, you know, he starts crying or he gets very emotional and very overwhelmed. I think we have a very long way to go. I think it's not going to be easy. You know, the first few days are filled with emotion and adrenaline and good food and clean water, you know, and toilet and things that, I don't know, maybe for us are like normal, like the fact that he woke up today in the morning and the first thing he did was looking for the sun, because for more than 2 years, he has not seen the sun. So we have a long way to go, and he'll be able to share whatever he feels like sharing. But as for now, we're hugging. That's what we do. We're hugging and fighting for the rest of the hostages.
Keep on hugging. We love to see that. I have to imagine, because of what Yair's been through, he can maybe help Eitan in some ways as they go through this recovery process together.
So I'll share a very personal thing that Yair, since his release, said that he's still hostage in Gaza, even though physically his body is in Israel. And when we came yesterday to the hospital, I think we all understand that actually we're getting Eitan and Yair back. And it's the first time that Yair can be released as well, because he was holding it because he felt very guilty for the fact that he was released and his youngest brother was still held hostage, and the fact that so many others. And since he came back, he was just fighting and fighting for them. So actually he's helping him because he knows the hospital and stuff like this. But on the same time, both of them, I hope, are going to start their rehabilitation. I want to mention that before they can do it, we still have 24 hostages, the bodies of the deceased hostages, that Hamas is not fulfilling their part. They should have been brought back yesterday. And yesterday they brought only 4 of them, and 24 still need to come back home.
We are happy to hear that message from you and implore that happens. Also, I do want to ask you just broadly, it's been a little over 2 years since the October 7th attacks. What's your hope for your family and the other hostage families as you work to recover from this and as this peace plan hopefully moves forward?
My hope is that we will finish the job of bringing back and making Hamas fulfill their part and bring back the 24 hostages, the bodies of the deceased, for a proper burial in Israel. And then we need to start healing. We've been fighting for 2 years by all means, and we need to start healing and rebuilding our loved country. And I think that we need to start planning and acting and doing more agreements in the region, because the only way of living here in the Middle East is if we do more agreements. We don't want to fight anymore. The Israeli society, we don't want to fight anymore. We want to live in peace with our neighbors, you know. We might not become best friends, but I don't think it matters, and that's not the idea. We want to be able to dream of a better future. I have 2 young kids. I want them to be able to live in peace. I want the Gazati people to be able to dream with a better future for the kids as well. So I think this is the next challenge that waits for us once we bring back everyone home.
A great message. Dalia Kusnir-Horn, a good morning indeed. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, back here at home, today marks day 14 of the government shutdown, with lawmakers remaining deeply divided over federal funding. The Senate is expected to be back in session today, but members of the House of Representatives will remain home this week as Speaker Mike Johnson decided to not bring back lawmakers this week.
House Democrats are reconvening today and planning to get together in person for a caucus meeting. Johnson's now predicting the current shutdown may become the longest in history. Right now, the record is 35 days. Johnson says he will not negotiate with Democrats until they set aside their demands to fund Obamacare subsidies.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona joins us now with the latest. Mel, good morning. So the expiring subsidies of the Affordable Care Act remain like really the center of this standoff 2 weeks after it got started, and Democratic leaders are just not budging on the issue. What else are we hearing from House Speaker Johnson about where things stand right now? What's it going to take for lawmakers to come together at all?
Yeah, good morning, guys. They are still at a standoff on Capitol Hill as we are now into the second week of this shutdown. And there are no signs that either side is budging. Republicans continue to insist that they are not going to entertain any negotiations over health care until Democrats open the government first. But Democrats, they are deeply skeptical that Republicans actually will cut a deal with them. It is a very complex issue. And so that is why they are withholding their votes, because they want some sort of forcing mechanism in order to ensure that there is a deal cut. However, Speaker Mike Johnson, he says he doesn't even want to get in a room with the other congressional leaders, something that has happened in the past. Just listen to what he said at his press conference yesterday.
The Senate Democrats cannot tell voters that they're willing to hold hostage funding for the nutrition of women, infants, and children in exchange for restoring health care to illegal aliens. So they want to do this behind closed doors. And you've heard Chuck Schumer say breathlessly, I just want the four leaders to get in a back room and make a deal. We're not doing that. We're not doing that anymore. We're getting back to regular order, and it's infuriating that that's what he continues to demand.
Now, Democrats have been hopeful that President Donald Trump will ultimately get antsy and want to cut a deal with Democrats, especially because so many Republican voters do rely on those Obamacare subsidies. But he's been distracted because he's been in the Middle East. So we'll see if he decides to get more dialed in now that he is back home.
So Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says Coast Guard service members will get their paychecks this week. And just a few days ago, we know President Trump announced he was directing Defense Department officials to pay military members who are set to get paid tomorrow. What more can you tell us about how they're going to get paid and just how this decision was made?
Yeah, so this is a trend that we are now seeing from the Trump administration. And what they're doing here is essentially moving funds around that have already been appropriated by Congress for other things in order to pay the troops, pay the Coast Guard, or in one case, they're also talking about using tariff money to try to fund WIC, which is the Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Program. Unclear if they actually have the legal authority to do some of this stuff. We're not seeing Democrats challenge them. But what this tells me, guys, is that the White House is preparing for a long shutdown fight. And it also alleviates some of the biggest pain points and pressure points in a shutdown. So there is less incentive for both sides, frankly, to try to get a deal here now that some of these biggest pressure points have been alleviated. But that being said, that doesn't mean the impacts of the shutdown are completely gone because, of course, so many federal workers still either being furloughed, forced to work without pay, or now, in some cases, losing their jobs altogether.
Mel, over the weekend, also the Trump administration reversed some layoffs. This is at the CDC. Hundreds of scientists received incorrect notifications, that's what they're being called, that they were being laid off. That's according to an official familiar with the matter. What happened there?
Yeah, the layoff notices that went out incorrectly were for people that work at the CDC, that work on tracking pandemics. Obviously, such an important job, as we've seen over the years. But what the administration said was that these were sent out because of a glitch. They also blamed the chaos of the shutdown and said these mistakes were made just because we're not operating at full force. But of course, this is very reminiscent of the DOGE cuts earlier this year when there were many layoffs that were made, later reversed. So this seems to be par for the course for this administration.
All right, Melanie Zanona, thank you very much.
So as the shutdown drags on, Wall Street's on a roller coaster ride. U.S. markets bounced back yesterday, recovering some of last week's major losses. Investors were relieved to see signs of softening trade tensions between the U.S. and China. That's why the Dow jumped nearly 600 points yesterday, while the S&P 500 and the tech-heavy NASDAQ also showed signs of life, coming off their worst day since April.
Today, global markets are mixed after initially joining a rebound driven in part by a post from President Trump on Truth Social. It's on your screen right now. It said in part, "Don't worry about China. It will all be fine." All of this comes as fresh tariffs on imported goods kick in today here in the U.S., and a new report suggests American consumers are the ones bearing more than half the cost of President Trump's tariffs.
NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung is here to break it all down for us. So a lot to cover. Let's talk about the trade war, which is really roiling the markets. We saw late last week President Trump threatening 100% tariffs on China taking effect November 1st. Markets didn't like that. What's happened since then? Where do things stand?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like for like a hot second there was a little bit of calm on the tariff front. And now here we are with the tariff headlines again resurfacing after the president threatened a 100% tariff on China. This all began last week when China announced new export restrictions on so-called rare earth minerals. These are types of inputs that are necessary for EV production, as well as AI infrastructure. They said that they would be kind of tightening their control over how much of that gets exported to the rest of the world. President Trump not taking kindly to that, going on Truth Social almost instantly and saying he was going to take action, and even suggested he might cancel an upcoming meeting with President Xi Jinping. So the breakdown in conversation between the two big economic powers that is the United States and China has been in focus. That 100% tariff is something that the president says he could put into effect on November 1. That effectively sets a new deadline for negotiations with the Chinese, although I should point out that U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent did point out on Fox Business yesterday that the meeting with the Chinese is likely still on. The president doesn't intend to cancel that for now.
Brian, what about these new tariffs that go into effect today? What kind of items are we talking about?
Yeah, well, if anyone's trying to do a home remodel, this could impact you. Now what we're talking about here is 10% on imported wood and timber. A lot of that comes in from Canada, by the way, in addition to 25% on imported upholstered furniture and 25% on kitchen cabinets and bathroom vanities. And by the way, those tariff rates will go up once we get to January 1st, 50% for kitchen cabinets. And it is pretty remarkable how specific we're getting with these tariffs now with something like kitchen cabinets. But again, anyone that's doing any sort of home reno is likely going to be, listening very closely for that, because those costs could get a lot more expensive.
The cabinets and vanities now. Let's talk more about prices. This new report from Goldman Sachs seems to suggest American consumers are struggling with high prices because of the tariffs here. What does the report conclude? And are we getting a better idea of where prices could go from here?
Yeah, this Goldman Sachs analysis saying that the tariffs put into place since the president started his second term, 55% of those costs have been shouldered by American consumers. And that's important to note because that goes against what the administration's been saying, which is that other countries will be paying those costs. And again, as a reminder to people, the way that tariffs work is that when an importing company, which is almost always an American company, here stateside tries to bring in, let's say, for example, a kitchen cabinet or a kitchen cabinet, well, then that is going to get tariffed. They're the ones that pay that cost. They then pass it on to the consumer in the form of a higher price. The Goldman Sachs analysis confirming that's the case. And that could likely get higher as we talk about these added tariffs, especially if there were to be that 100% tariff on China at the end of this month.
So, Brian, during his re-election campaign, President Trump, he promised to bring prices down on day one. That was a big piece of this. We know how much the economy mattered to people during the election. Has any progress been made at all? How's the White House defending what they've been doing?
Yeah, well, look, the overall rates of inflation are somewhere between 2 to 3%, depending on what month you're looking at, which I think by all standards is relatively good when you consider the rate of inflation was somewhere closer to like 8 or 9% during 2022, specifically during the summer. So from that perspective, yes, prices are not that bad in terms of the rate of inflation. But again, it's still positive. Prices are not going down on an overall level. What the White House has said in terms of, kind of pushing back against some of these tariff talks about Americans shouldering the cost. This is Kush Desai, a spokesperson for the White House. They're basically saying that the cost of tariffs will ultimately be borne by foreign exporters. But take a look at that first sentence. They may face a transition period from tariffs, upending a broken status quo, as they describe it. So they're kind of admitting that there's going to be this period of time where Americans might be paying those higher costs, but it's going to be worth it to reshore American manufacturing. Again, how long that takes, though, is the open question here.
All right. Brian, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Brian. Well, if you're anywhere on the East Coast, you probably feel like you are stuck on weather repeat with this slow-moving nor'easter that seems like it is just dragging on. Well, the coastal storm is finally expected to pass out of New England by the end of today. Those rains and powerful winds, though, will still linger for areas along the coast after 20 million people were under coastal flood alerts yesterday. For more on the impacts of this fall nor'easter, here's NBC News correspondent Sam Brock.
The powerful nor'easter that's pounded the eastern seaboard, taking aim at the Jersey Shore.
We wanted to see how much beach we had left,
leaving Ocean City under feet of water. We're now approaching high tide, and barricades litter Ocean City, blocking drivers off from streets. And not for a few wet patches either. I'm a half a block away. This water goes as far as the eye can see. Officials today taking stock of the disintegrating beach, which caved before our very eyes.
Look at that. Yeah. Yep. Taking it with them.
Frank Donato is the emergency management coordinator. In 1 week, this entire dune has been eroded.
Correct. Yes. So it takes one storm. That's all.
In New York City, city officials say the nor'easter's howling winds ripped a solar panel off a carport, hitting and killing a 76-year-old woman. The system's devastating force also felt in the Carolinas, where mounds of sand line Hatteras Island on the Outer Banks, the bumps on the ground, cars buried underneath it. While thousands of miles away in Alaska, remnants of a typhoon stranding people in remote villages who had to be hoisted to safety by Coast Guard helicopters. At least 3 people are still unaccounted for. Doreen Carter's home was swept away with her family inside. They escaped by boat, but she says now there is no home and no town to return to.
The house is unlivable. We can't live in there anymore. This is the worst ever. It's totally, Kipnik is totally wiped out.
Sam Brock, NBC News.
With that big nor'easter clearing out, there is a new severe storm threat on the West Coast this morning.
That's right. Angie Lassman has your morning news now forecast. Taking a look at that. Hi, Angie. Good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning to you. Indeed, we have to watch the West Coast. Just a quick note about the nor'easter. You can see things drying out by afternoon. We've still got some of those morning showers and breezy conditions and maybe still some coastal flooding, but improvements on the way, especially as we get into the second half of the day. Different story, as you mentioned, out west where we are ramping things up. We've got the potential for some severe storms even this morning. There is a threat of a couple of tornadoes here as we get through our morning hours on the West Coast. Notice this thunderstorm watch that's in effect, including parts of Southern California, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, included in that thunderstorm watch through 6 a.m. Pacific time. So we'll watch for that as some of this rain is continuing to stream on in. You can see flash flood warnings and flood watches are up for that same region. We're going to have kind of repeated rounds of this heavy rain as the day goes on. It's all part of this system that's going to work farther to the east through the day today. It ramps up the snow and wind across parts of the Sierra Mountain range. We'll watch for that to make travel impactful, of course, for that region. You can see some of this rain spreading farther into Nevada as well. We'll see the possible flooding last through the day today in California. And then this area of snow and rain expands across parts of the Rockies. We'll still be dealing with some of those stronger storms across parts of the Southwest as well. No surprise, as I mentioned, we've got some snow on the way. So winter alerts are up. Winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories stretching across the Sierra range. You've got Lake Tahoe included in there, Mammoth Lakes also. So a heads up, again, travel is going to be difficult. We're also concerned about that rainfall, specifically for Southern California through Thursday. Notice multiple inches of rain possible. We'll watch for the debris flows. We'll watch for issues with the burn scar areas. Any area that you often see flooding when we get a good dose of rain across that region, likely to flood today. And then as we talk about the Sierra range, notice 36 inches in the highest peaks. We'll see some significant snowfall. I know skiers, snowboarders happy about that. But again, this is going to cause some difficulty when it comes to travel across that area. And this will be snowfall that we get through Thursday. So we've got a couple days as this system works across that region, guys.
Just ski to your destination.
Yeah, there you go. Good idea.
All right. Thanks,
Time
Angie.
for snow. Oh, my gosh. Thanks, Angie. All right. Well, this morning, SpaceX is celebrating a successful test flight of its massive Starship rocket. The largest and most powerful rocket ever built completed a suborbital flight yesterday, building off their victory during a similar test back in August. The Starship blasted off from southern Texas to conduct a series of tests, including practice for future landings back at the launch site. The spacecraft went to the edge of Earth's atmosphere before it eventually splashed down in the Indian Ocean. This marked the 11th test flight for a full-scale Starship rocket. It's what SpaceX founder and CEO Elon Musk hopes will one day be used to send people to Mars. It is also, though, a critical part of NASA's Artemis program. That's the one that plans to land astronauts on the moon for the first time since the Apollo missions.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.